A safe route gives people choices. A trap gives them one direction. Tessa Marr had taught that line to assault teams in buildings that had no right angles left. And now she was saying it under a Dallas stadium, while 90,000 people above her screamed at a soccer ball. The sign over the service passage read, "Safe Route," in green block letters. Fresh vinyl. Clean arrows. A venue operations intern had probably checked the font twice and slept badly anyway. The corridor beneath it breathed warm air out through the seams in the cinder block. As if the building had a fever it was trying to hide. Is less than #0. 4# is greater than. Slate stopped before the line crossed into the marked route. He did not bark. He did not perform. He simply checked back, ears high, mouth open. Working line. German Shepherd body angled half toward Tessa and half away from the arrow. That was the part that bothered her. Heat made dogs sloppy. Noise made dogs lie with their feet. This was neither. Slate's nose dipped toward the floor, then rose toward the upper conduit run, then came back to Tessa's face. Grant Vail looked over his shoulder from 6 yards ahead. He had a tablet in one hand, a hard hat under the other. Is less than #0. 4# is greater than, and the expression of a man who had spent too many years explaining obvious physics to people who wanted good news. Dog doesn't like the sign. Grant was former Army engineering stock, repurposed into stadium structural safety, which meant he disliked mystery on principle. Tessa liked him for that, and trusted him about halfway, the healthy distance. The venue had hired her for K-9 readiness evaluation. After 2 heat failure drills went ugly during the opening week of WC 2026. They wanted a signature on the route package, not a war story under the building. Is less than #0. 5# is greater than. Tessa had no interest in giving them either cheaply. Slate had worked hotter rooms and louder rooms. He had crossed oil smoke, stair dust, drywall powder, and the wet copper stink of places people did not walk away from. He did not refuse because a sign was ugly. He refused because something in the passage made his training argue with his body. Dog doesn't like the route, Tessa said. Different problem. Grant tapped the wall beside the sign. Public path above is overloaded. This is the dry route. Service corridor. No fan zone. No concourse spill. No drink carts. No families. It gives staff choices if the upper decks lock. Tessa stepped to the sign, but not under it. The concrete floor had been scrubbed recently. Too recently. A faint crescent of cable dust had survived along the base of the wall where a mop had missed the edge. Slate's nose found it and stopped again. Above them, the matchday roar rolled through the steel ribs of the venue, huge and happy, and useless down here. The air tasted of hot concrete, machine oil, old cola syrup, and plastic insulation warmed past comfort. Tessa tracked the corridor geometry without moving her head. Safe feeling entry, narrowing middle, is less than #0. 5# is greater than. 2 staff doors with fresh access seals. 1 marked exit that sat too far down the line to matter if bodies started moving wrong. A sign was cheap authority. Paint, arrows, confidence. Tessa had spent half her life walking people past signs that promised order while walls burned around them. She trusted doors that opened, floors that held, dogs that showed doubt, and people who could still make choices under fear. Everything else had to earn its name before she let it guide anyone. Grant came back, less amused now. Is less than #0. 4# is greater than. It's ugly, but it passes on paper most days. Under normal match load, theoretically, barely. Passing isn't the same as giving a person a choice. He opened his mouth, then saw her kneel. The torn strip lay partly under a grated cable tray. White plastic with a ripped edge and a red smear through the barcode. She did not touch it right away. First, she looked for the story around it. No full blood trail, no loose tools, no dropped phone, no panic scatter. Whoever lost it had not been attacked here. He had been moved through here and damaged somewhere close enough for his wrist to brush the cable run is less than #0. 5# is greater than, not paper. A service ID wristband, the kind temporary electrical contractors wore when full badges were late. Cable dust clung to the blood like gray flour. Tessa lifted it by the clean corner. The name was mostly gone, but the last letters were still there. Ibarra. Slate leaned away from the safe route sign and gave one low, unhappy breath. Tessa looked down the marked passage again. The route had stopped being a review. Someone had already been moved through it. Tessa slid the torn wristband into an evidence sleeve from her vest and did not call it evidence yet. Is less than #0. 5# is greater than. Evidence belonged to people with time. Right now it was a direction, and directions mattered only if she moved before Hale turned the next one into a wall. Grant said nothing for 3 steps, which was the closest thing he had to panic. The service corridor bent under the west stands, cooler for 20 yards. Then warmer again, where the air handlers shoved breath through a forced return. Slate worked ahead of Tessa on a short line, his nose low. Then high, then low again, trying to keep the torn wristband's story together. The scent held near the cable tray. It thinned at the first junction. Is less than #0. 4# is greater than. At the second, it broke so cleanly. Slate checked back with irritation in the set of his shoulders. Airflow cut it, Tessa said. Grant looked at the vent grid overhead. Those returns are always stupid. They fight the service doors when the roof fans kick. The match above them hit another wave of noise, a long rolling roar that made the ceiling hardware tremble. Somewhere in the venue a crowd saw a near miss and became one animal. Down here, that sound arrived late and dulled, like weather through a closed door. Slate tried to rebuild the trail by quartering the corridor edge. Is less than #0. 5# is greater than. Then paused at a strip where dust had been wiped in one direction only. Tessa saw the smear and pictured Rafa being moved fast, not carried. A dragged man left chaos. A guided man left interruptions, one heel mark, one shoulder brush at painted concrete. One place where cable dust touched a door plate too high for normal traffic. Hale's people had not cleaned perfectly because they did not need perfect. They needed match-day noise, badge confidence, and a route everyone had already agreed was safe. Convenience, stupid. He gave her a sharp look. Bad design is not malice. No, Tessa said, is less than #0. 3# is greater than, but malice loves bad design. That landed harder than he wanted it to. Grant had the kind of practical pride that hated drama but respected load paths. He turned his tablet so the building map glowed blue-white across his palm. There's a maintenance dogleg past the blue pipe run. After that, the route narrows. It was supposed to keep crowds out of the broadcast service lane. Supposed to. Slate pulled half a step, then stopped again. Not a clean trail. Not a proof. A fragment. Tessa took the corridor with her eyes and heard Nora Keene in memory. He is less than #0. 5# is greater than. Not as a ghost, not as a voice, just as an old failure sitting behind a door. A route that looked official had killed Nora because it removed every other choice first. Tessa stood before the thought could grow teeth. A service door opened ahead with no squeal from its hinges. 3 men in Vendor gray moved through it like they belonged to every badge reader in the building. The middle one had a hand under another man's arm. The held man's head lifted for a second. Rafa Ibarra, was not impressive. That was the first thing that cut through Tessa. He was small under the men's hands, sweaty. Is less than #0. 4# is greater than. Cable dust down one side of his neck, his orange contractor shirt torn at the shoulder. Low status. Useful. Hurt enough to sag, not hurt enough to be carried. Whoever had him wanted him walking. Tessa took one step and Slate came with her, body tight. Rafa saw the dog first. Then he saw Tessa. His eyes did not ask for rescue in any clean way. They flinched toward the ceiling, toward the wall, toward the pipe, run disappearing behind him. His mouth moved. "Blue pipe," he said. One of the gray men tightened his grip. "Is less than #0. 4# is greater than." The man closest to the door looked back at Tessa, calm as a supervisor checking a late delivery. Hale Rusk stood behind them with his sleeves rolled once, no visible hurry, no performance. He did not reach for a weapon. He just shifted half a step so the service door framed Rafa and swallowed him. Grant moved beside Tessa. Suddenly all contractor and no commentary. "That door shouldn't open from that side during matchlock." "Then it's not a door to them," Tessa said. Hale gave her one courteous look. As if they had been introduced in a lobby instead of a service corridor with blood on a wristband, is less than #0. 5# is greater than. His face had the irritating calm of a man who knew most people, confused credentials with authority. He wore no badge, Tessa trusted, only confidence arranged like uniform cloth. That confidence made the young stadium worker by the junction lower his eyes. It made Grant take one involuntary step back toward the wall before he caught himself. Then his crew pulled Rafa through, and the door closed quietly on the word blue. The next stretch of dry route was where the venue became proud of itself. Painted arrows, low amber lights, clean floor, is less than #0. 3# is greater than. No crowd noise, except the deep animal wash of match day leaking through concrete. It looked calmer than the rest of the service level, which was how it sold the lie. Calm made people obedient. Calm said, "Keep going." Tessa did not keep going at first. She watched the walls. 2 access doors to the right had fresh seals and no usable handles. The left side was a pipe wall. Blue and red and black runs stacked like a diagram no one had time to read. Ahead, the corridor narrowed under a sloped duct and bent out of sight, is less than #0. 5# is greater than. Behind them, the door Hale had used had already locked itself back into official silence. Grant's breathing changed when he saw it. Not fear. Recognition being dragged into a bad neighborhood. This section was never meant for public movement. It's marked for it now. Temporary emergency plan. Match day crowd model. Keep people off the concourse if the heat load spikes. Tessa looked at Slate. He was walking, but not comfortably. Nose working, ears flicking toward doors that offered no choice. If a person enters here under fear, where do they get out? Grant did not answer fast enough. The no-choice middle began 30 feet past the blue pipe elbow. Tessa felt it in her body before the map confirmed it. Her old teams had used that feeling in reverse. You learned which hallways let a frightened civilian choose wrong and which hallways made choice disappear completely. The second kind was useful in assault work and unforgivable in public safety if anyone lied about it. Nora Keene had died in a passage like that, a clean-looking connector with a bad turn. And a door that promised exit until the moment it did not. Tessa did not let the memory open. She let it touch the work and leave. Is less than #0. 4# is greater than grief. Was useless if it wanted the room. Useful if it pointed at a hinge, a door seal. A place where a body would hesitate because the route had made fear predictable. Her shoulders wanted to narrow. Her stride shortened without permission. The route took options away in polite increments. A sealed staff closet, a locked equipment cage, a service alcove filled with stacked barriers. Then a heat curtain from an exterior loading cut that made the air tremble at ankle level. A frightened person would keep moving. A captured one would be easy to steer. Is less than #0. 4# is greater than. A handler with a dog would lose clean scent in the airflow break, then lose space in the narrowing. Hale's crew was not improvising. That was the ugly professional part. They had not picked the shortest route. They had picked the route that made every wrong decision feel official. A stadium worker in a blue vest came around the bend carrying a coil of cable. Saw Tessa and tried to turn away too quickly. He had sweat down both temples, and the dazed expression of someone who had been told 3 different emergency rules by 3 different radios. That mattered. Is less than #0. 3# is greater than. A frightened insider could collapse a route faster than any outsider with a weapon, simply by obeying the wrong instruction at the wrong time. Slate stiffened. Tessa put one hand low, not releasing him, only asking for quiet wait. "Hold there," she said. The worker froze. He was not crew. Too scared, too young, too badly trained for Hale. His eyes went to the bend ahead. Tessa followed the glance and caught motion. Gray sleeve, Rafa's orange shirt, a flash of blood at the cuff. Still alive. Still upright. Grant's face went hard. Is less than #0. 4# is greater than. There's a service door after the bend. If they take him through that, they can dump into the truck throat. They won't dump him, Tessa said. They need him moving. For what? She did not know yet. Not enough to say it. But Rafa's wristband, the cable dust, the forced airflow, the locked doors, and Hale's calm movement were starting to build one answer. Controlled handoff. Forced identification. A living key, not a witness in the TV sense. A man who knew which door, which panel, which route, and could be made to point while still breathing. Slate shifted toward the bend. Is less than #0. 4# is greater than Grant saw at this time, and did not dismiss it. Tessa moved before Hale's crew could take the next choice away. She did not wait for Grant to agree. And to his credit, he did not waste breath pretending disagreement would change the corridor. He fell in behind her with the map dark in his hand, finally listening to the building instead of the plan. The first direct hit came at the bend, and it was almost boring. No shout. No big rush. A gray-shirted man stepped out as if to ask a question and put his shoulder into Tessa's path. Hale's people understood service corridors. Is less than #0. 4# is greater than. They did not need dramatic violence. They only needed to block the exact 3 feet that mattered. Tessa took the collision on her left side and gave ground she chose, not the ground he wanted. Slate surged, body hard at her knee, and the man flinched from the dog before he remembered himself. That flinch bought Tessa a look past him. Rafa was 8 yards ahead, pushed by 2 men toward a side door with a blue pipe turning over it. His feet dragged but kept working. Hale was behind him, one hand near Rafa's upper arm. Not gripping hard enough to bruise in front of witnesses, hard enough to own the direction. Tessa did not move toward Hale. She moved toward the door. The gray-shirted man adjusted too late. Tessa crossed his line, put her bad shoulder into the edge of a rolling barrier, and shoved it enough to keep the side door from opening cleanly. Not a trick. Not a move worth naming. Just position, weight, and a fast read of what Hale needed erased. The barrier's metal corner bit through her sleeve. Pain snapped down her arm. Grant swore behind her. That door feeds the service throat. The man in front of Tessa tried to look offended instead of blocked. Is less than #0. 5# is greater than. That was another tell. Real staff got angry when their job was interrupted. Hale's people got smooth. He lifted both hands, palms open, the universal language of I am reasonable and you are the problem. Tessa did not buy a word his hands were saying. She saw the angle of his hips, how he kept 1 foot free to close the distance if Rafa slipped by. She saw the second crewman behind him using the worker on the floor as cover without ever touching him. Good field movement hidden inside customer service body language. It would have been elegant. Is less than #0. 4# is greater than. If it were not aimed at a hurt electrician, who had probably started the day worrying about cable runs and overtime. Then keep it ugly. I can do ugly. He threw his tablet aside, grabbed the barrier with both hands, and made himself useful. Slate stood between the gray shirt and Tessa, breathing hard, not attacking. Just existing with enough promise to make the man choose caution. That was the best kind of K-9 help in a crowded service layer. No heroics, no teeth, just space. Hale looked at the blocked door and understood the new shape faster than most men would have. He did not curse. He is less than #0. 4 is greater than. He turned Rafa away from the side door before the barrier fully settled, redirecting toward the narrowed, dry route ahead.
Tessa went after him and paid for it. The gray shirt caught her jacket and drove her sideways into the pipe wall. Heat flashed through her ribs. Slate barked once, sharp and furious, and the sound punched down the corridor. Tessa kept one hand on the leash and the other on the man's sleeve, not fighting to win, fighting to keep him from turning her back away from Rafa. A second worker stumbled into the bend and flattened himself against the wall, eyes wide. His badge swung loose on a lanyard. Real badge, real fear, bad place. Tessa shifted, so his line to the floor stayed open. That was the old work, stripped of slogans. Leave the harmless person one direction that did not run through violence. Hale's crew kept trying to remove directions. Tessa kept trying to give them back. Civilian, staff, not Hale. The difference mattered, and it stole the clean violence she did not have anyway. Down and stay down, Tessa told him. He dropped. The gray shirt used that hesitation to break contact and move after Hale. Grant held the barrier long enough to leave a scrape across the floor, and a gap too narrow for the door to swing. Bought you maybe 10 seconds. Use them twice, Tessa said. Ahead, Hale pushed Rafa deeper into the no-choice middle. Tessa had kept one route option alive and lost distance doing it. That was the trade. The safe route kept pretending to be safe. The trap under it had simply adjusted. Tessa marked the adjustment and carried it forward. Hale did not need a perfect corridor. He needed each next choice to be worse than the last. That was manageable. If she could stay close enough to make one bad choice cost him 2. The chance came at the loading cut, where the dry route pinched beside an exterior service mouth, and the heat outside turned the air silver. Hale's crew had to cross a strip of open concrete to reach the next service door. Rafa stumbled as the heat hit him. One of the gray shirts hauled him upright. Hale looked back once, not at Tessa's face, but at her hands. Tessa had a clean sightline for less than a second. Clean was the lie. The hostile nearest Rafa was exposed. Tessa's hand found her sidearm by training older than thought, and the corridor gave her the old math. Distance, bodies, heat shimmer, Slate moving at her left. Rafa's shoulder half behind the man's ribs. A stadium worker frozen near the service mouth, with both palms up like surrender, could make him invisible. Her fingers stopped, before impulse became disaster. No shot, she said. The words tasted worse than blood. Somewhere in her body, the old assault leader part of her catalogued the lost chance and filed it without mercy. A younger operator would have wanted approval for restraint. A bad one would have wanted credit for courage. Tessa wanted the corridor to stop offering her choices that looked clean only if she ignored the living people attached to them. Slate's shoulder crossed the lower edge of her line. At the same time, the frozen worker shifted his weight. Rafa's body was not just behind the man, it was part of the man's shield, unwilling and alive. That was the geometry. The rest was ego. Grant was close enough to hear. You had him. I had Rafa behind him. That shut Grant up. Good. Silence was faster. Hale saw the refusals, and for the first time, his expression sharpened with real interest. He understood restraint. Worse, he knew how to spend it. He moved Rafa into the open strip, making the electrician's body the center of every bad angle. Slate pulled toward the heat mouth, then checked back, confused by hot air, exhaust, sweat, and too many moving men. Tessa shortened him without looking down. Rafa's face turned toward her. His eyes were glassy now, but he recognized something in the man holding him. Not the name maybe, not the whole crew. Recognition lived smaller under pain. Panel crew, Rafa said. The words cracked. Not event staff. Hale's man hit him low in the side. Not hard enough to drop him. Hard enough to fold the next word inside him. Rafa made a small sound and hated himself for making it. Tessa saw that too. The useless shame injured people carried when they could not perform toughness for strangers. He was not trained for this. He had probably spent the morning checking panels and pretending not to watch score updates. Now men with clean hands were making his body into a root key. Tessa moved, but Hale shifted Rafa again, using him like a door that had to remain intact. A chant from the match above rolled down through the concrete, happy and immense. Under it, the service level became a thin place where one wrong choice could erase every later one. Tessa could stop a man and lose Rafa. She could protect Rafa and lose time. Those were the choices Hale had left her, which meant the root was still doing his work. She chose Rafa. The gray shirt crossed the open strip and reached the next service door. Hale followed with Rafa upright, mobile, conscious enough to be useful. Tessa took off after them. Slate at her side, Grant behind her, breathing hard and angry. "You're bleeding," Grant said. "Later. Your dog's cooking." Tessa heard it then. Slate's pant had changed. Heavy, wet at the edge. Not fear, and not work drive. Heat. She hated Grant for noticing before she admitted it. Ahead, Rafa twisted his head back one last time before the next door swallowed him. His mouth shaped blue, but the rest broke apart in the roar from above. Hale gained the door, because Tessa had refused the clean stop. It was the right call. It still cost. Grant looked at her hands after the door shut, saw what she had refused to do, and seemed to understand a little more of the job he had been mocking with maps. Tessa had no room to appreciate his growth. Growth could write its own thank you note later. Slate went down 3 corridors later, and he did it without drama. That was almost worse. One moment he was at Tessa's left knee, moving rough but moving. The next he slowed, missed the line of her hip, and folded to his chest on the warm concrete, like someone had taken the strings out of him. Tessa stopped so hard Grant bumped into her shoulder. Slate. The dog lifted his head. His tongue hung dark. His eyes tracked her, but the focus was behind a film of heat and fatigue. She pulled the reward tab from her pocket and put it in front of his nose. He turned away. That hit harder than the pipe wall. Grant crouched, not touching the dog. Smart enough for that. "He's done." Tessa wanted to hate the word, because done sounded like failure. It was not. Done was a body reaching the edge of what training could borrow. The K-9 handler who forgot that deserved to lose the dog before the mission was over, and sometimes the universe was happy to collect assaults. Slate's vest was hot under her palm. The black fur along his shoulders had picked up gray dust from the corridor floor, making him look older in a way that struck her as obscene. She checked his gums, his eyes, the rhythm of his chest, keeping each motion small. No panic for him to read. No apology for him to chase. The mission kept moving ahead, and she stayed kneeling, because this was also the mission. "No," Tessa said, because the first answer out of a handler's mouth was often selfish. Slate tried to rise when she shifted her weight. He failed on the first push, managed half of one on the second 5. Tessa put a hand on his shoulder and held him down. Not force. Permission. Slate did not need to prove he would follow her until he broke. He had already done enough. The corridor ahead carried a faint metal bang, then a muffled cry. Hale was still moving Rafa. Every second Tessa spent with Slate widened the gap. Every second she ignored Slate turned the dog from partner into equipment. She had buried enough people who had been treated that way. "Water?" she asked. Grant passed her a half bottle without a comment. "Bless him," occasionally. She wet her fingers and rubbed Slate's gums, ears, chest, keeping it practical, because practical was how you did not fall apart. Above them, Dallas roared at a near miss. Down here, heat made the walls sweat old dust. Grant looked at the sealed service door ahead, then back the way they had come. He had lost the tablet somewhere in the chase and looked better without it. More useful. Less like a man trying to make a building confess through glass. Around them, the dry route hummed with trapped heat. Slate's breathing filled the low space, rough enough that even Grant stopped pretending the dog was just gear. "I owe you a correction. Make it short. The route may not have been built as a trap," he swallowed, eyes on the locked doors, "but it can be used as one." Tessa nodded once. That was as much ceremony as the truth deserved. A sound came through the vent run over the blue pipe. Not clear words. A body dragging breath. Then Rafa's voice, thin and torn, carried through metal and distance. Wrong turn after blue pipe. Grant's head snapped up. That's the maintenance crossover. If they turned after the blue pipe, they're not going to the service throat. Where? He was already on his feet, pointing down the corridor not with confidence but with dread. Hot open route. Exterior asphalt. They can cut across to the dry corridor from there if the cooler side closes. Tessa looked at Slate. He was still breathing too hard, still with her, not available in the way she wanted. She clipped the leash shorter and left him in the sliver of shade behind a service cart, where the concrete was a few degrees less cruel. The old Tessa, the one commanders had liked because she solved problems fast and paid invoices later, would have dragged him up. That woman had lost enough. "Stay," she said softly. Slate's tail moved once. Barely. Hale had gained a second movement window. Tessa had saved her dog's life and lost time doing it. Both facts stood there in the corridor, equally true, equally inconvenient. Then she rose, took the next turn without Slate leading, and followed Rafa's phrase toward the heat. For the first time that day, the left side of her body felt empty, and she let it feel empty for exactly one step before the route demanded the rest of hers. The hot open route was not a route so much as a punishment painted onto asphalt. The door banged outward into service daylight, and Dallas heat came in like a hand over Tessa's mouth. It smelled of tar, hot rubber, generator exhaust, and the sweet rot of spilled drinks drying somewhere near the loading fence. Beyond the strip of shadow, the exterior service lane cut between the stadium shell and a line of temporary barriers. It was bright enough to flatten depth. Hale had chosen it because bodies failed faster in open heat. Rafa was already bending under it, one man on each arm, feet scuffing the asphalt. He was alive, mobile, barely, conscious enough to suffer, which was the condition Hale needed. The exterior lane had been designed for trucks, carts, generators, and men in reflective vests who knew exactly where shade ended. It was not built for a heat-stressed witness or a handler running without her dog. A row of temporary tournament banners snapped weakly against the fencing floor. Their bright blue WC 2026 logos looked cheerful in the same stupid way emergency signs always did, when nobody had tested them against fear. Tessa saw the heat making decisions for everyone. Staff slowing under hard hats, Rafa's knees softening. One gray shirt choosing the edge of shadow without thinking. Grant wiping sweat from his eye and missing a step because the asphalt glare stole depth. Grant came out behind Tessa, blinking hard. Cooler route is cut. By who? Mara's closure order started. Too late. She's trying to lock public bleed-through, but it seals the side return. Mara Holt's voice cracked through Grant's radio, controlled and furious under static. All service movement freeze. Repeat. All non-essential service movement freeze. I want route supervisors on Channel 3. Tessa almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because systems had a gift for becoming strict after the damage learned to walk. Slate was not with them. The empty space at Tessa's left felt wrong enough to tug her balance. She made herself read without him. Rafa's knees, Hale's shoulder line. The way the crew avoided the hottest strip near the black barrier mats, the cut-off cooler door ahead, the one exterior gate that looked open but funneled toward a no-choice middle of its own. Two event staff froze by a rolling trash cart. One started to step toward Rafa. Tessa lifted a hand. "Stay back." The staffer listened, because Tessa sounded like consequence, not hope. Hale looked over his shoulder and saw her in the heat. No surprise. He had expected pursuit. Maybe not this fast without the dog. Maybe not with Grant on her right, red-faced and angry, reading the service layer like a man watching his own work used against him. Rafa's head rolled toward Tessa. His lips moved. No sound. She saw blue in the shape of it. The clue had become a clock. Hale's left-hand man saw it too, and pulled Rafa harder, not cruelly, efficiently, the way a man adjusts a failing strap before the load falls. Tessa hated that kind of care most. It looked almost responsible, until you remembered what it served. Grant grabbed her sleeve. If they reach that exterior bend, they can force the dry corridor. One blocked exit behind them. Hot open route ahead. No room for you to flank. Then don't let him pick the door. Grant looked at the service doors along the wall, then at the barrier line, then at Hale. His skepticism was gone now, burned out by heat and bad proof. I can deny one route. One is enough if it's the right one. They moved, not as a charge. Charges were for clean fields and bad movies. Tessa cut toward Rafa's outside line, forcing Hale's crew to adjust. Grant ran for a service door painted the same dead gray as every other maintenance mistake in the venue. Mara's voice kept snapping over the radio. Late closure, head count, accountability, useful in 10 minutes. Dangerous now. The asphalt cooked through Tessa's boots. Sweat ran into her eyes and turned the world salted and white. Without Slate, she had fewer warnings and more responsibility. Hale dragged Rafa toward the bend, and the cooler side door sealed with a heavy magnetic thunk. That left heat, asphalt, one bad corridor, and whatever Grant could break without turning himself into the hero of someone else's story. Behind them, the covered stadium kept roaring, as if the day still belonged to sport. Down here, beneath the fun, the route had narrowed to bodies, heat, and the kind of choices signs were supposed to prevent. Grant broke Hale's plan with his shoulder and both hands, which was exactly the kind of stupid practical courage Tessa trusted more than speeches. The service door Hale wanted had a recessed pull and an emergency release panel mounted too high for a panicked crowd, but low enough for a contractor who hated bad design. Grant did not open it. He planted himself in front of it, grabbed the side rail of a rolling equipment rack, and dragged the rack sideways until metal screamed on asphalt. No tutorial, no clever trick, just mass, leverage, and a man willing to become a bad piece of architecture. The ugly beauty of it was that Grant did not need Hale to believe he could stop him forever. Forever was not a useful unit in a service lane. He needed 8 seconds, maybe 12, enough to ruin the preferred handoff, and make the next choice worse for Hale than it looked on the map. Tessa saw the calculation in the set of Grant's back. Former combat engineer, current safety contractor, still the kind of man who understood that a blocked path could be a weapon or a mercy depending on who had to turn around. Hale's crew hit the rack from the other side, and Grant's boots slid half an inch. He held anyway, face gone red, the rack vibrating against the wall. "Hale!" one of the gray shirts called. Hale saw it. His face did not change, but his pace did. The smallest cut in rhythm, enough for Tessa. He had expected the service door, expected the choke beyond it, expected to put Rafa through a controlled handoff point, where Tessa would lose sight for 2 seconds too many. Grant had turned the preferred door into a blocked exit. "Grant," Tessa said. "Busy." His voice came through his teeth. The rack shifted under pressure from Hale's crew. Grant shoved back and nearly lost his footing on a patch of oil-dark asphalt. He caught himself against the rail. His palm left blood on the metal. Still not the hero, still not the win, but the route had changed. Hale adjusted toward the dry corridor entrance because it was the only remaining line that kept Rafa alive and moving. The choice exposed him in a way paperwork never could. He was not hunting Tessa. He was not killing witnesses. He was preserving one damaged electrician long enough to spend him somewhere else. Every step he took confirmed the limit she would need later. Tessa moved with him. Her shoulder throbbed from the earlier impact. Her ribs had begun their own private argument. She ignored both, because Rafa was stumbling and the gray shirt on his left had started to carry more of him than guide him. From the service shadow behind them, Slate appeared in the doorway. For 1 second, Tessa's anger outran her fear. Slate. Down. He did not come full speed. He could not. He moved like a dog, dragging the last of his work through heat. Head low, breath rough. But he came. Because the bond between handler and dog was not a switch either of them knew how to turn off. He stopped short of the asphalt glare, panting in the threshold. Present, but spent. Hale's eyes touched the dog and dismissed him. A mistake, but not a fatal one. Slate was no miracle. He was only another cost in the room. Mara's voice broke through again on Grant's radio. "Grant, I need confirmation. Is the east service door denied?" Grant laughed once, breathless and unhappy. "Very denied. Do not improvise structural closures without authorization. Put it in my review." Tessa almost liked him then. Hale's crew dragged Rafa into the mouth of the dry corridor. The space beyond was narrow. concrete-walled, and brutally plain. One blocked exit behind Hale, thanks to Grant. One hot open route ahead. No crowd to hide in, no map to lecture over, no paperwork, just Rafa alive, between Hale's need and Tessa's protection zone. Grant stayed at the denied door, both hands on the rack, holding the route failure he had created. Slate stood in the shade behind Tessa, swaying once, then catching himself. Mara's closure order was still coming too late, turning the venue tighter around them. Tessa stepped into the dry corridor after Hale. The route had finally stopped pretending to be safe. That almost made it easier. Almost. A lie wearing clean arrows wasted time. Bare concrete at least had the decency to show where it would hurt you. The dry corridor had no mercy built into it. Concrete walls, low pipe run, heat pushing from the open end ahead. Grant's blocked exit behind Hale. Rafa in the middle, alive, because Hale still needed him that way. The geography was finally simple enough to hurt. Hale turned, with Rafa held close, one hand at the electrician's upper arm, the other low at his side. His crew hung back at the mouth, because Grant's denial had narrowed their help into interference. That was the best thing Grant had done. He had not saved Tessa. He had made Hale's help arrive in the wrong shape. The corridor could hold only so many bodies before it stopped serving the man who wanted it. Not theatrical, controlled. He was not trying to kill Rafa. He was trying to move him one more turn, force one more identification, make one more living body unlock the handoff he had been promised. Tessa Marr, Hale said. First time he had used her full name. He made it sound administrative. She kept walking. Slate gave a weak sound behind her, not a bark, almost a cough. Tessa did not look back. She felt the shift instead. The dog's body had angled toward the left wall, toward air moving through a narrow pipe gap, where the corridor bent near the blue run. Not a solution, not truth, a tired cue from a dog who should have been lying in shade. Tessa took it as seconds, nothing more. Rafa saw her eyes flick. Pain cleared his face for one hard moment. Wrong turn after blue pipe. The phrase landed differently here than it had in the vent run. Not a clue anymore. A refusal. Rafa knew this turn. Maybe from wiring work. Maybe from the day the temporary panels went in. Maybe from some forgotten stadium task nobody with a clean shirt had considered important. Hale needed that memory walking and obedient. Rafa used it to become less obedient, his face tightened before he moved, which told Tessa the choice hurt before the body proved it. Hale tightened his hand. Rafa cried out but did not step. That was his choice. Small, costly, real. He planted his heel against the floor seam and made his hurt body a bad hinge. It was enough. Hale had to keep him conscious, had to keep him walking, had to keep him able to identify whatever waited past the turn. Tessa used that limit the way she would have used a wall. She did not rush straight at Hale. She moved toward Rafa's planted side, taking away the turn without taking away Hale's need. Hale shifted to drag Rafa through anyway, and Tessa hit the space between intention and movement. Her shoulder paid first. It slammed into Hale's forearm and lit with old and new pain. Hale was stronger than he looked. Or maybe she was more damaged than she wanted. He drove her back half a step. Rafa buckled. Slate tried to come forward and nearly went down. Tessa heard his nails scrape and made herself not reach for him. "Stay," she said, voice flat. Slate stayed because he had nothing left to disobey with. Hale used the moment to turn Rafa toward the hot open route. Tessa let him think he had the line for one breath. Then Rafa, pale and shaking, twisted his weight the wrong way on purpose. Not a fight, not a hero move, a refusal. Hale had to catch him or lose the living key. Tessa moved on that catch. No elegant choreography lived there. She got one hand on Rafa's shirt and one shoulder under Hale's driving arm, trapping all three of them against the wall. Hale could hurt her. He did. His fist hammered into her bad shoulder, and something inside it went loose and bright. But to get free, he had to drop Rafa or crush him against the pipe run. He could not do either and still win. Grant shouted from behind, too far to solve anything. Mara's radio barked commands that arrived as noise. Slate gave one more strained lean toward the correct side and collapsed to his chest, breathing. Done. Tessa kept Hale pinned long enough for Rafa to slide down the wall out of Hale's grip. Rafa hit the floor hard, rolled toward Tessa's boot, and dragged his knees under him with a sound that was more anger than strength. Hale looked at the open end, then the blocked exit, then Rafa out of reach. His plan failed in the body, not in a report. The extraction broke right there on dry concrete, with no clean capture, no applause, and no spare breath. Tessa stepped between Hale and Rafa, her right arm hanging wrong, Slate down behind her, Grant finally reaching the corridor mouth. Grant did not rush past her. He saw the shape and stopped where he was useful, blocking the mouth with his body, and one hand on the rack he had dragged into Hale's plan, practical to the end. Damn him. Hale still stood. So did she. That was the last useful fact before the venue's late authority arrived like weather after the roof was already gone. No one thanked Tessa in the corridor. That helped. Gratitude would have made standing harder. Rafa Ibarra survived on the floor, with his back against the concrete truss, both hands wrapped around a paper cup Grant had shoved into them. A security lead kept asking him for a statement, until Mara told the man to stop using the word statement. Rafa was not a document. Not yet. Maybe not ever, if someone in a cleaner room decided he was inconvenient. Tessa did not say that part aloud. He drank too fast, coughed, and drank slower when Grant told him to. His face had gone gray under the dust. A live gray. Tessa accepted the distinction because it was the only kind available. Slate lay in the shade of the service cart, with a venue medic crouched near him and Tessa's hand on his ribs. The dog breathed under her palm. Too fast, but steady. He had no final nobility to offer anyone. His tongue hung out. His eyes were half closed. When Tessa touched the base of his ear, the ear moved once. That was enough. More than enough, if the universe was taking requests, which it almost never was. Mara Holt arrived with a route supervisor, 2 security leads, and a face built for bad meetings. She did not look corrupt. She did not look stupid. She looked like a woman who had just discovered her emergency plan had been used as a weapon, and would now have to answer for it in rooms with carpeting and selective memory. The dry route is pulled, Mara said. All safe route signage comes down until review. Good, Tessa said. Mara's eyes went to Tessa's hanging arm, the blood on the shoulder seam. Hale being held at the corridor mouth by people who had arrived too late to matter. Your clearance is suspended pending formal review. Grant made a sound. You have to be kidding. She's not, Tessa said. Mara did not soften. That was almost respectable. You acted outside the clearance envelope. The words were bureaucratic enough to make Grant's jaw bunch, but Tessa heard the strain under them. Mara had a stadium still full of people, a pulled emergency route, a contractor alive on the floor, and a private crew whose access had not come from nowhere. She was holding the system together with both hands, and still making it cost the person who had embarrassed the system by surviving it. That was unfair. It was also how institutions protected themselves long enough to become useful again. On the rare days they managed it. Hale acted inside yours. The line landed, not as a victory, more like a debt being written down. Mara looked toward Rafa, then the covered service door, then the safe route sign above the first entry. Someone had already taped black plastic over half the letters. Safe still showed, route did not. A perfect little accident, because naturally the universe had a taste for cheap design. Rafa lifted his head. He wasn't alone, he said. Tessa turned back to him. Rafa's eyes were open but not steady. Panel crew. 2 shifts. He had somebody before the match. His breath hitched. I didn't know until Blue Pipe. I swear I didn't. No one said you did, Tessa said. Grant crouched beside him, practical as ever. Save the rest for when you can keep the words in order. Mara heard enough to go colder, not cleaner. Colder. We'll preserve the access logs. Grant looked at her. You better hope they still exist. That was the aftershock. Not a revelation big enough to become a new scene, just the small, ugly fact that the network might have touched the system before Tessa ever stepped under the sign. A worker climbed a ladder and pulled at the covered safe route sign. The tape stuck, then tore, leaving adhesive strings and dust. Slate, too spent to rise, turned his head toward the half-covered sign. His nose moved once, weakly, toward the wall below it. Tessa saw the movement. So did Grant. Beneath the peeled edge of vinyl, a second arrow showed through, faint and older, pointing away from the route they had just closed. Mara followed their eyes and said nothing. Tessa kept her hand on Slate's ribs until his next breath came in. Then she looked at the old arrow under the sign, at Rafa, still alive on the floor, at Grant's blood on the equipment rack, and at Mara's review team finally learning how late could be. No ceremony, no justice clean enough to admire, just a covered sign, a tired dog breathing, and another direction waiting under the glue. Tessa did not point it out right away. She kept counting Slate's breaths, because the next route could wait one more second. The living